Hi there. I'm going to talk about interstellar propulsion and which type of propulsion would be most likely used by extraterrestrials to get from star system to star system. First off, we have chemical rockets. We're very familiar with these here on Earth because that is pretty much the only way that we can get into space right now. And chemical rockets use chemical reactions between a fuel and an oxidizer, and there are two types of chemical rockets. One is a solid chemical rocket, which uses solid rocket fuel, which is easy to store and handle, but it has a lower specific impulse. Specific impulse is the amount of thrust that you have per kilogram of fuel. The other type of rocket is liquid chemical rocket, and it's capable of being throttled, but the fuel is usually toxic, and it's very difficult to store because it's very volatile. The next method of propulsion is using antimatter as a fuel source. So when antimatter and matter collide, that process is called annihilation, and in annihilation, about 99% of the mass is converted to energy. So as a result, antimatter has a very high energy density, and it has a high specific impulse. However, it's difficult to create and much more difficult to store because if you want to use antimatter as a fuel source, you need to keep it magnetically confined, because if it touches anything like a container that we would use, it's made out of regular matter, and it would annihilate, and there'd be a lot of radiation that would be emitted within the ship itself. And the way that you would use the antimatter to propel the ship would be, one, either you use the radiation from the annihilation process itself to propel the ship. The second way is to use the gamma radiation that's produced from annihilation to basically evaporate an exhaust fluid and propel the ship that way. Another method of propulsion is nuclear power, and with fission you can theoretically produce a high impulse, and it has a high efficiency. It has a fairly low thrust. With fusion, it has a high specific impulse, and you only need a small fuel supply. You need to have a large reactor mass. And the main distinctions between the two is that with fission, you usually use the energy to heat up an exhaust fluid, like with antimatter rockets. However, with fusion rockets, you can do that as well as use the plasma that is generated as an exhaust. However, in that scenario, you would have to keep adding hydrogen or helium to fuse. Another way of going from star system to star system is by using a buzzard ramjet. Buzzard ramjets use enormous electromagnetic fields to collect and compress hydrogen to use for fusion, and as a result, you do not have to carry fuel with you. However, the thrust of a buzzard ramjet is limited by the drag force caused by flying through clouds of hydrogen in space, and also it requires a high initial velocity and for fuel to exist along the flight path that you have chosen. The next propulsion method is the Alcubierre drive. So Alcubierre drives theoretically allow for faster than light travel, and requires large amounts of energy and exotic matter. So basically how this works is that you have a positive mass on one end of the ship and a negative mass on the other end of the ship. And the positive mass contracts space-time in front of the ship, and the negative mass expands it at the back of the ship. Effectively, you wouldn't be moving at the speed of light. The ship itself wouldn't be moving at the speed of light. However, you would create a warp bubble around the ship, and that warp bubble would be moving faster than the speed of light. So in essence, it's kind of like your space-time is moving you from point A to point B. And there has been some research done by NASA. It was inconclusive, but the estimates that were made were that it requires the rest mass of Voyager 1. Basically, that means that you convert all of the mass of Voyager 1 to energy, and that's how much energy it would take. And Voyager 1 weighs about the mass of an SUV. So yeah, lots of mass, and so far not possible, but it would be a great way to get from star system to star system. Another way of getting from star system to star system is by using solar sails. So solar sails use the radiation pressure from a star, lasers located on the ground, or nuclear decay of fissile materials that are on the ship. And it takes a low amount of effort to propel the ship, and it's an inexpensive method of doing so, and you could possibly reach the speed of light. However, it takes a very long time to accelerate a ship using this method, and if you want to have a higher acceleration, you need to have a larger sail. Einstein-Rosen bridges are yet another method of interstellar travel. They theoretically allow for instantaneous travel from one point to another. As you can see from the diagram, in essence, it's almost as if you're bending space, and you're just creating a portal from one point in space to another point in space. And the main issue for creating a wormhole is that you need to have exotic matter to keep the wormhole stable to allow you to go through it, because if you do, and exotic matter in this case is negative mass, which so far that we know, does not exist, and however you need it in order to pass through. If you don't have it, what would happen is pretty much you'd fall through the wormhole, and you could see through the other side of the wormhole, but you would be stuck in the middle, and it would basically be like falling down a black hole, which is not the best deal. But if you could make this would be the best bet to get from point A to point B in space. Lastly, we have black hole propulsion. So with this method, you have a small black hole at the back of a ship, and you feed it a consistent amount of matter, because small black holes will quickly evaporate. And whenever you feed a black hole matter, it will emit Hawking radiation, and it's possible to use that Hawking radiation by reflecting it back out of the ship and propelling the ship that way. However, the only thing you have to be careful about is not feeding it too much matter, because then that way the black hole could possibly grow too large and engulf the entire ship. So my group thinks that the top two methods that extraterrestrials would use to travel from star system to star system would be wormholes or Alcubierre drives. Wormholes are more preferred because it allows you to travel from point A to point B instantaneously, whereas Alcubierre drives you are still restricted to a speed. However, the drawback for both is that it requires exotic matter, but assuming that aliens have either found exotic matter or I have a workaround. The best method would be a wormhole, and the second best method would be alchemy drives.